Hello, and welcome to the Glass House webcast. Today's topic, keeping your disaster recovery plan from turning into a disaster, will be presented by Richard Witherow, a Glass House senior consultant. Richard has 18 years of experience in the backup and recovery field, working directly for major corporations such as Digital and Intel. He has designed and implemented backup and recovery architectures for SMBs in industries including but not limited to legal, government, and healthcare. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Witherow.
Thank you, Ty. Welcome, everyone. All right, keeping your disaster recovery plan from becoming a disaster. Let's start off with a little definition. And I went to go write one on my own, and hems and haws and decided I'd go to Wikipedia and just download what they had. Essentially, what we're going to be talking about today is disaster recovery. The disaster recovery is just one subset of business continuity. We're going to be talking about technology. While there's still people involved, process and procedures, business continuity does lay more heavy on getting the business back running, making sure people are available, that sort of thing. We're going to be talking about technology. So disaster recovery plan. If you ever had to design disaster recovery and come up with a plan for your corporation, you appreciate this is probably the single most complex project you'll take on in your career. The reason I say that is because this is going to touch every component of your infrastructure, and everything's in scope when you start out. The reason for this is because you want to remove items because of cost restrictions. You want to remove items because they're unnecessary to the business. Some systems are there for development. You don't need them in a DR situation. Some systems might be just for supporting non-critical projects. But when you first start that plan, it's everything. Everything your company does, everything within technology, every system, every component, everything has to be looked at. Another aspect of when you put together a disaster recovery plan is that you need a mature operational model. And you're going to have serious challenges developing a good DR plan if you don't have one. Half the plan is technology. So if you don't run your shop clean, precise, good processes and procedures, you're going to have a hard time understanding what technologies you need in a DR situation. I mean, you can go easy one-to-one. You have one system here, you put one system at the other side. Very costly. It is possible. So most likely that plan will get shot down your budgetary cycles. The other half of the plan is how to use the technology. What's going to be used for? Let's say you have physical servers and you're going to go to virtual if you go into a DR situation. Understand that technology, understand how to bring those systems up, having information available. All again, this is the biggest project you can take on. So some of the key components, essentially the foundation. These are the building blocks. I find if you have these in place, you have a very good chance of succeeding. Management backup. You need management on board. They need to be not only in your court, but they need from the top down discuss the policy that's going to be put in place, communicate the policy out to everyone, and make sure everyone's following that plan. And it's not just IT management. While IT management is the core to it all, and their backing is the most important, backing from other management is also important also. If your business partners aren't going to work with you, it's kind of hard to make sure that they're getting what they need in the DR scenario, or even from an operations standpoint. Well, that leads us to people. People not only within the IT department, but people also in the other groups. They have the direct, hands-on knowledge of what goes on for the business, and they're the best equipped to answer the questions. Which leads us, of course, to communication. Good communication from start to finish, and all throughout, and then continuing on is critical to the DR plan. Also, business requirements. So here's where we're going to get into in a little while. The difference is between you want to have something and you need to have something. Application dependencies. Here's where we're going to be talking about what a system does for your company and how it's important, how it relates to other systems, and how, in some people, I've seen some plans where this wasn't designed for, and we'll talk about some of those pitfalls. Business impact analysis. This is where you start to get into the cost. What's it mean for a company to have that system online? And this usually, if done right, becomes your litmus test for not only what type of solution you get in DR, when you get recovered in DR, and even if you're on the roadmap. One of the other aspects we'll also talk about is capacity planning through threshold management. I typically talk about capacity planning when we're talking about budgetary cycles. It's in here because if you can have the greatest plan in the world, it can be, cover your company, but if you don't have enough capacity in a short amount of time or in a year, or you didn't plan for something, that'll cost you. And if you're asking for too much, your nice plan will get shot down for budget reasons, and you only get a partial plan. So asking for what's actually required and having the stats to back it up is support. So let's talk about management backing. So this is the working with the other departments. No matter your business working relationship, the goal should always be what is best for the company. So while everyone can have their differences, everyone can say my system's more important, this system's more important, that app isn't. Everyone needs to understand it's making sure that the company survives a disaster scenario. So there are 3 ways IT can do business with its partners. And I've really only come down to these 3. I've chatted with other people about different setups. Me, these are the 3. So working with the person, or with the business groups, this is your best bet. A lot of this presentation is going to be somewhat under the premise you're actually working with your colleagues. To avoid a lot of pitfalls, this is what you need. Since they have the information about how our application works, it's one thing to give them a server, give them storage, give them network capability, but appreciate and understand how their application works usually just comes directly from them. The next way to do business, saving them from themselves. If you work in the IT field, you probably spend a lot of time saving the customer, your internal clients. If, let's say, their system performance is off, they're not really noticing, they're running out of storage space, or they just have bad planning and say, this project came out of development, we need it supported. If you have a server, rack space, power, space in your backup window, so you're eventually, essentially saving them from themselves. The last way, and this is typically how, aside from saving them, move forward without them. It is an IT shop. You guys provide the technology. If they can't provide you with the business requirements and any information, then they get a standard service offering, keeps IT costs low, you're fine. I've seen that taken up a lot lately. So let's talk about people and information. So if this was, the perfect world scenario where everyone got along and talked, you'd be looking at the CTO or the CIO needing information. They need to make the decisions that do the budget. So how do they get this information? Well, they need to get the information from the bottom up. After they communicate from the top down, what is the goal? What is your direction? What is going to be your policy? How are you going to drive it? So if you have a technical committee, a customer committee, and a financial committee, people that are the different layers down can sit on those committees. This way, the open communication, you find out what business groups are doing, what projects they have in the pipeline, what technologies are out there. You're tapping into all the different abilities and knowledge that the workers have. Keeps them involved. Everyone's on the same page. If it worked out well, this is how it would work. You have your various layers of IT and business management. They need to be in sync. Same playbook, so to speak. Which brings us to one of the things I think is important. And some people will argue with me saying, well, over-communication is a bad thing. Communication, no, too much is never enough. Having the information available, doing it appropriately, do it at the right times. First one is corporate policies and expectations. So, like I was just talking about, the CTO or the CIO, or if they're the same person, they need to explain what is the corporate policy. Where are you driving? You want to have a DR plan that gives you all the same capabilities that you have now. Expensive, costly, but doable. If they say the policy is going to be, we need to pare this down to just the minimum of what we can, only the critical apps, need to find them, need to make sure that they're appropriately protected. There's your expectations. So clear corporate policy and expectations, critical to starting this out. Just handing a person the job and title of, you're now playing for your DR, and sending them off and maybe, one little email, they have the title now. That's not going to do it. I've seen that fail way too many times in corporations because nobody wants to talk to the DR guy. We'll get into that in a moment. Terms and definitions. This is also important. They don't all talk on the same page. being discussing things in the same terms, I have a slide on that. I'll hold off. So, communication of the current ability. People will assume there's a DR scenario, plan. If you have nightly backups, people automatically assume you have a DR solution. And while, yes, backups can be used in a DR situation, it's your slowest, it's your most cost-effective. It will get the job done if designed correctly. But if that is your current ability, that needs to be communicated. Your business groups need to know that their critical app that is earning the company $1 million a day doesn't really have a DR. It will be down for a week or a month in the current environment. So communication of the current ability is important. It also can help with the communication of bringing people on board, having them want to help out and give you information so that they get the appropriate protection. Communication of the future ability, back to the expectations. Well, you can have expectations going down through the IT department of what the solution should do for the company. There should also be the communication to the rest of the corporation of what the future ability is going to be. If it's going to be from physical to virtual, there's going to be a hit in performance, there's going to be a reduction in capacity, there's going to be no development or QA while you're at the disaster recovery location. That ability, whatever it's going to be, that needs to be communicated also. So business groups, during the plan or during the execution, have a clear understanding of what's occurring. In communication and developing the plan, keeping everyone on board, making sure that the right people are pulled into meetings, the right information is flowing. In communication to implement the plan. How are you going to communicate? How are you going to call a disaster? Who's in charge? So the implementation of the plan, how it would work out. Updating the plan. Communicating out that this is not something that's just going to sit on a shelf and once you have it done, it's good for the next 5 years. It might be good for the next 5 years. It might be good for the next 5 minutes because another project just rolled off that wasn't included in your design. It has a shelf life. So communicating that they're going to be part of the continuing effort, and you can put some steps involved so you don't have to fully flush out your disaster recovery. Change control can be a good conduit to making sure that you haven't gone over the top. And during the execution of the plan, as I just mentioned, how is that communication path going to flow? Is it going to be everyone's going to be paged out? Are they going to be called on the phone? Are you going to plan for cell phones being out, communications being down, no email? So during the execution of the plan, how everyone's going to communicate together. I was recently at a company, a very large company, and whenever they had a major outage, they would have each of their groups get into a war room, and they would look at what was impacting their particular application, and then they would literally have a runner go to the next war room to give them up an update. Someone would come back to them, and there would be multiple floors, multiple levels in a building of people running back and forth to give information updates. And this was a major corporation. So how to handle things during a disaster is important. So definitions and statements. Making sure perception is reality. You can have the best laid plans, but it might only be what somebody thinks is going to happen. We've already talked about the difference between disaster recovery and business continuity. But your business group needs to understand you're going to be providing the technology to have the application, the server, the storage, all of that ready for them. Business continuity is another project that the business group itself takes on. How do they need the technology? How are they going to use it? What is going to, what kind of capacity they need? How many phones? Those sorts of things. Making sure people understand what zero downtime means. You tell somebody who's not technical, yeah, zero downtime solution. They'll think that that server never goes offline. That it never has maintenance. It never has any patching. It's possible to have an application with zero downtime. That gets into the dollar ranges, though. Clustering. Sometimes when people hear clustering, they're assuming that one system will take over for another. Clusters work in different fashions. They can load balance. They can share resources. But if you're talking about a cluster that's only within the one data center, that's not going to help you in a DR. So there's a big difference between local clusters and geo-clusters. High availability, close to zero downtime. Some people think downtime is their systems goes down. High availability, the application's always available. Understanding what is meant by high availability. Is it local high availability, where that in the data center, one system can go down, no one even notices. Except IT, they get an alert, they go fix the problem. Or is it global? where you have it in multiple locations? And are you going to be sharing resources across multiple locations? So making sure that everyone has the right idea. What I've seen at a lot of corporations is that most of the management staff that isn't in IT is not a technology-based manager. So appreciating that and helping them understand either through analogies, training, or just talking to them and outlining what it can do, it's critical to making sure that everyone's on the same page so that after a disaster, something goes down, there's an understanding of why something took so long. One of the things I keep hearing, my staff assures me they can have the system up in 3 hours. Oh, that's good. 3 hours, 3-hour recovery time objective. Doesn't say how much data was lost. And more times than not, this is where a manager goes, I took their word for it. There was no testing. There was no verification. And the staff meant that they'll have that system, which means they'll take a server, they'll swap it in, they'll put an OS on it, they'll patch it, they'll get it in the domain if we're talking Windows, and it's ready. Don't know if the data's there, don't know if the application's installed, none of those components. So typically you'll see that it only takes 3 hours, but is it one little piece or a larger piece? Making sure everyone's talking about the same things is critical. One of the perceptions, IT services are free. There's very few companies that do true chargeback for IT services. So everyone wants, they go to the car lot, they want the Maserati. Can't say I blame them. So if you ask a customer what do they want for a DR, they'll say high availability and zero downtime. Possible, but also the most costly. So making sure that they understand that they need to be requesting things that are best for the company as well. So let's talk about some of the details in the critical business components. Business requirements. Now, this is a business requirement to me is the difference between a want and a need. You can say, I want a laptop with 12 gigs of memory, 8 cores in it. But if your department application needs 2 cores and 4 gigs of memory, that's what you require. So making sure that you're getting out of your customers, when you go to talk to them and sit them down and say, okay, we're designing a DR plan, what do you need? So they're going to say, well, I want high availability. Or they're going to say, my system is the most critical system at the company. I have colleagues that tell stories of they would sit down and everybody who came in would tell them this. But they were working at a hospital. Well, the person who's run application is the one that the guy flying in the chopper has a patient, they need the information right away. That's the person who needs high availability. The person who would have to now fill out a paper form instead of using the computer, they're on the low end. So making sure you get the real business requirements and the business justifications. What is justifying needing a certain level of technology? Application dependencies. So planning for one could mean planning for another. What this means is you have, let's say, this one application and you design a DR solution about it because this is a critical application. It's been identified. For small and medium businesses, you probably have 1 or 2 that you would say, these are critical. You design a solution for it. Disaster recovery event happens. All right, execute the plan, communications go fine, building's up and running, systems are online, they're not working. Well, come to find out, those 2 applications need information from 2 other applications. So there was 4 you needed to protect. So understanding how an application takes information from one and also how it feeds off to another. Understanding that cycle to make sure that if it's a tier 1 application, being your most robust solution, that anything it's dependent on also needs to be included in tier 1. Doing a business impact analysis. So we've talked about what you need, we've talked about how it works, and this is what it costs the business. So your justifications are done here and your denials are done here. So back to when I was talking about you can either work with your customer, you can save them from themselves, or you can go around them. If you're working well with them, they're going to be able to tell you exactly what they do for the corporation, and you could do a tier level that way. You can also tell by how the system's used, what it talks to, so you could help them with the application dependency. For the business impact analysis, if they can't tell you what they do, or they don't want to explain, they don't want to be part of the project, you just say, does it make revenue, or is it customer facing? It goes on a higher tier. So you can go around them. but it's best to talk with them because you need to understand what it is that this application does for the company. This is how, if it's revenue facing and it's $1 million a day, well, it's going to get a pretty decent solution because having it down for a week is $7 million. So if your solution costs $2 million, it's an easy math problem to do. So you need to understand what an application does for your environment, how it works with the others, and is what you're requesting necessary. So you can get past the business requirements and application dependencies, and they've asked for less. You hit business impact analysis, you find out that this is a critical app that's going to cost the company a lot of money. You can up their tier level even though they didn't ask for it. So you're saving them from themselves. So this is how it all works out. It's a nice little checks and balances. So back to capacity planning through threshold management. And normally for the budgetary purposes, but I like this because you need to know what capacity is required and what do you have. So let me explain the chart we have here. Some of you may have seen one similar. So essentially everything within IT can be tracked this way. CPU performance, storage capacity, network bandwidth, nightly backups, tape usage, across the board, everything can be tracked. And it's a simple generic chart that if as resources consumed, it goes towards predetermined checkpoints, and they're broken up to, you start the PO process, you receive the new capacity, and if you hit that third checkpoint, it's essentially an outage situation that's possible. So it gives you the nice criticality of, I'll either be out of storage space or I'm going to be redlining my server every night until it's fixed, and having that highlighted. So you need to monitor this at a pretty regular basis because while I show a nice little near perfect line, it can go dips and valleys. You can see that while there might be a median line similar to the blue line on there, but with the dips and valleys, it might get hidden. So appreciate and understand your metrics. Very valuable in determining when you need to make a purchase, how much of a purchase you need to make. So not only can it tell you, I need to make a purchase at period 7, and it needs to be here by period 9, and whatever those periods may be, they may be weeks, months, however. But it tells you, if I purchase X amount of capacity, how long will it last? Well, I can look at my metrics and show, well, it's been using it at this rate. If I buy 2 terabytes of space, it's going to last me until next quarter. And then, okay, that's a good purchase. Or I can get a deal on 4 terabytes and it's another quarter. It helps you with your purchasing. What this can also do, and why it's important to disaster recovery planning, is if you have so much capacity at your primary site, you need so much capacity at your DR site. So as you're monitoring what's occurring in your environment in production, you can also be making those augmented purchases in your DR facility so that you don't cut over and find out we didn't plan appropriately. And this can also flush out the numbers if you put a plan in place, you had in the tracking metrics, but you had to put the DR in place and you bought all the hardware, you'd have an idea of, okay, how much capacity am I using up, and how long will I be able to run in DR without additional purchases. So tracking is very important. From a performance standpoint, let's just say you are going to go physical to virtual. You understand that while I'm in the DR facility, 50% performance is fine. All right? You need to track what is your performance utilization to make sure you have enough virtual hardware on the other side to hit that point. On to the next slide, we're going to talk about some terms. And I could have listed these in the definition section also, but I want to pull them out and talk about them a little bit more. So your recovery time objective. This is how long the service is going to be down. And there's 2 types. You have the operational recovery time objective. So for all intents and purposes, loss of a single component, loss of a single system, storage goes down. Yes, it's multiple systems, but it's operational. It didn't take the whole department down, hopefully, which is different than disaster recovery, where you lose an entire data center. Everything's down. You have to ramp up and go somewhere else. So how long this lasts, and also, when does the clock start? So one of the problems people get into is where, your disaster can become a disaster if you didn't add up all your times correctly. Unless you have the geo-clusters and the replication and all your hot systems, and it wasn't even a blip that one site went down. There's going to be some time in between outage and back online when the service is available again. Outage, is any time that the customer or client clicks and nothing happens. It starts then. Your alerting system, when it gets reported to your NOC or your service desk, that's additional time. Then there's time that it takes for somebody to say, okay, this is a disaster. Let's hit the big red button. Let's move to our DR site. That typically takes a bit of time because it's going to be a senior level person making that call. IT shouldn't make that call. Business should make that call. You have the technology there. You've explained to them what its abilities are, and they'll be taken into account. How much time, effort, cost will be to fill back over if it's an outage, say, the power went out because they cut a line in the street. Well, I have a 4-hour RTO. It's going to take them 6 hours to get it back online. Do you cut over, be up in 4 hours, essentially stress test your DR plan, but then have to take an outage to fill back? So a business group needs to make these decisions. But they need to also appreciate how much time each step takes, because while management is making this decision, the business groups, the application owners, they're sitting there staring at their watch happening going, you said 4 hours. So you also have to take into account how long it's going to take to get systems online, to build a system, patch a system, restore data, all of that. Everything gets added together, and that becomes your recovery time objective ability. So when you design for lower than what you're going to state, because you have up to typically 4 hours for Tier 1 applications, unless you go with zero downtime, global cluster, and that sort of thing. So that 4 hours can get chewed into very quickly. And I've seen a lot of companies fail because they didn't add all the little pieces of time together, or appreciate that they made everything Tier 1, everything 4 hours. Well, that was 50 applications and several hundred servers, and you're not going to bring those back online with tape backup, not in 4 hours. So let's talk about recovery point objectives. So this is the age of the data that you're going to be using after disaster. So if you take one nightly backup, you're going to have a recovery point objective of 24 hours. And just like in disaster recovery, recovery time objectives is operational and is disaster. So again, the loss of data for a single component. My example of nightly backups, well, you're going to have data that's at least 24 hours old, or up to 24 hours expected. So if you took a backup last night, if that backup was missed, you're up to 48 or more. If you take snapshots, it's whatever interval the snapshots are. So recovery point objective is critical because how old is the data? If you're a financial institution and you're doing stock trades, you can't be losing a whole lot. You're talking seconds for trades, milliseconds. You want a very tight window. If you're a small mom and pop and you just do eBay on the weekends, not the same thing. So you need to understand how old can that data be. The younger it needs to be, the more expensive the solution. Because at 4 hours, you're mirroring, you're doing snaps, you're doing secret replication. There's a lot more going on. So, disasters waiting to happen, places where things can go wrong. And being one of the most complex projects you'll ever take on, there's a lot of places things can go wrong. Processes and procedures. I'm just going to highlight these real quick. I got a slide on each one of them. So processes and procedures, what are people going to be doing? How are they going to be doing it? Things can go wrong with your technology. The age of your plan, when was it made? When was it updated? Any projects land that weren't incorporated, don't know about? Contracts. How are your vendors going to treat you during an outage? Of course, time. And the viability of your solution. So until you test it, is it really going to work? We'll get into that. So, processes and procedures. The biggest one, missing or outdated. Always a big one. You didn't do a walkthrough. So you have no walkthroughs. No one's even gone through the plan other than its initial creation. Your disaster is going to be a disaster. New projects not taken into account. Did you change control board? Capture new systems coming online that are going to need resources at the DR facility. And missing information can be all the way down to, we're at the DR site, everything's coming online, we didn't install the encryption keys. Anybody got a copy? That could be a showstopper. So making sure that everything you need is somewhere else in a disaster. So missing and outdated, big ones. Only way to get through that Test your test. It's the only way. So clear paths of communication, not understanding who's going to be doing what, where they're going to be, what they're going to be doing. We talked about that one. How about who's in charge and how much authority do they have? So you have all these processes in place. Nobody understands who's going to hit the red button. Or there's two people identified, both are out of the country. How many contingencies do you have? Who can make that call? Who can say, yeah, they cut the line on the street, but we can't be down. Go to the DR site, and it's going to be, $2 million of downtime now, added to when we fail back. Plus, because we're using a colo facility, we're going to be taking a charge because now we're utilizing the hardware that's at the facility. So, who can make that call? Has it been identified? And how long does your RTO last if no one knows who it is and they're scrambling and taking up the time to figure that out? So no access during an outage. What if your process and procedures were online? I have seen this happen. But it's on SharePoint. Is your SharePoint replicated to the DR site? Oh, no. All right. Not to, be doom and gloom, but your data center is a smoldering mess and you don't have a DR plan. Oh. So keeping your plan in an alternate location, very important. And process and procedures does come back to people, and there's no one available to implement them. Not getting too dire here. I have a slide about it. We'll discuss it. So more disasters waiting to happen. Technologies. Are they doing what they were designed to do, or the configuration wrong? I've worked at a couple companies where the picture on your left there was what was thought to be occurring. And on paper, there's a very good design. That's why I'm using it as an example here. So they had VIPs coming in to a global load balancer, going off to local load balancers at each of their sites, Site A, Site B. And they had clustering local. They had geo-clustering. They had global SAN infrastructure, so it stretched across. They had synchronous replication, and they had snapshots off to the devices as well. Great design. Here's where they had some problems. Come to find out, they had no snaps running. So data corruption from Site A, when the outage started, transferred over to Site B. Data was corrupted. No snaps to say an hour before, 10 minutes before the outage, we were fine. So there was a massive loss of data. Or they didn't understand when they configured a VIP to go into the local load balancer. So this hardware is being used by multiple applications. And at this particular client, some went into the global load balancers, but a lot of them went into locals. So if that site went down, even though resources were being shared across two sites to create high availability, they didn't have it. Because while the design was great, somebody came along, was using the capacity, configured up, no checks and balances, poor communication, change control, whatever it was, they did it wrong. Replication, not capturing all the data. So you have synchronous replication, everything's at both sites, it doesn't get corrupted, but you weren't replicating everything. New things came online, new LUNs were available, and somebody decided, well, I want to keep the WAN utilization down, so you had to ask for it. So while you designed great, the processes and procedures failed you. Or you're using local clusters only, but you're not using geo clusters, and you still have to bring them up at an alternate site. So technology can save you, and not using the technology appropriately can make it all a disaster and almost a shameful waste, because if you go through this much hardware and to have the configuration wrong. So policies and procedures, having standards in place, having your change control board have a lot of authority to say, no, somebody else has already did this design, somebody already implemented it like this, your business justifies using a global load balancer, or just everyone gets to. Having those catches in there to make sure that you're saving the customer from themselves and saving people from implementing the wrong solution because they asked for the wrong thing. Like, I know I want it in Site A. Well, but it still goes into the global. It'll go to Site A. We can route it that way. But you're going to have the redundancy. Saving them from themselves. So, the plan agent viability. Of course, that's just leaving the plan on the shelf for too long. As I was saying, it could be good for 5 years, it could be good for 5 minutes. So the continuous updates are required for new projects, capacity growth, and change in business drivers. So new projects coming online, if you have good communication, you'll be seeing these during the development stage, be able to plan accordingly. The capacity growth lets you know that how much you're going to need, how much to add on to your DR facility. And the communication with your business groups, you'll understand that, well, the application that was a Tier 2 had a good revenue stream, but whatever product line they were supporting took off. Well, they become a Tier 1 application because now they're the majority of the revenue coming into the company. That has to be identified and appreciated so that that application can be put onto Tier 1. And you'll be able to know, if you're watching your metrics and your capacity, can you put it on Tier 1 today, or do you need additional resources, and if so, how many? So testing the parts or the whole, it has to be carried out, make scheduled intervals, split up in the quarters, monthly, something to keep in the business group's ears, make sure the plan is set, but test as much as you can. If you can fail over to a DR site, run for a little while and fail back, do it. Try it. Make sure it works. It's the only way to flush out all the little components that might be a problem that you really don't want to be figuring out and dealing with during a disaster. And it all comes down to, what is your relationship with your business partner? And how will that impact the plan execution? So if you haven't been talking with them, you haven't got a lot of information, and you took the keep them safe or go around them approach, what's going to happen when you're DR into a facility, you bring the storage, and you have clear communication with the application owners, the DBAs, how is it going to impact you? And having that identified. It could be a good driver to open up communication. So another disaster waiting to happen. The disaster recovery site is close to your primary. Well, a number of companies have been doing this lately where it's a very short distance, drivable distance, and they do it because of staff and this, because they have 2 sites and they decide, well, if one location's down, the other is still up. That's great for an instance where the power was cut, the data center got flooded, those sorts of things. But if you have a regional disaster, New Orleans comes to mind, or power outages like we had several years ago in the Northeast, having your data centers in the same geographical area means that it could both be impacted by a regional outage. So what does this also mean? Earlier I talked about, well, what if there's no one around to implement the plan? That could be as simple as, okay, you work Monday through Friday, you're closing the weekends, there was no one at the site, there was a fire, there was a flood, let's go with flooding. There was flooding. People are going to be more concerned about their families and the impact to them than getting over to the DR site and running through a plan. If there's massive earthquakes, if you hit by a tornado or a hurricane, not as concerned. And if the power's out, nothing for them to do anyways. So understanding your DR plan is going to be impacted by a regional issue can help save you or help push for having it somewhere else. So one of the last ones, one that you don't see covered too often, is how much vendors actually can influence your DR plan. From a budgetary standpoint, they're huge, but also for when you go online in your DR site. So the software vendors, can they provide critical support if the application does not come online? So you DR, it's over there, it's not available, you call them up, are they going to be available to help you expeditiously? And what if you decided in your DR plan, well, I'm going to take this application, I'm going to go from physical to virtual. That seems to be the craze lately, to use virtuals at a DR site. Well, what if you call them up and say, I can't get this application running, or it's running at a very slow pace, this isn't going to work out. And they say, well, what's going on? You tell them, they go, we don't support it on virtual. So is your software vendor, your application vendor, are they going to be there to help you in a DR? Or are you going to find out after the fact? Hardware vendors. So you hit your DR site, you know you're running with low capacity because if you're going to stay there, you figure you ramp up. You can just add capacity as you need it. but you need, if you just fail over. So the outage of the electricity, shorter duration, easy to pick which one you do. But if the site is gone, is out, fire in the building, that sort of thing, can they get you that large order of supply in a short time? And do they have fast resolution hardware outages? You haven't been stress testing at your DR site, the hardware probably. Let's say you have a hardware failure, you're going with a smaller set of systems, that's a larger impact. So will they be able to come out and quickly identify and resolve issues at your alternate site? Service providers. A lot of people use managed services, have somebody that can remotely, help them with storage, backups, those sorts of things. Are they in the same region as you are? Will they be impacted by a tornado or a hurricane or power outage? Well, power outage won't be able to get site anyways unless you have nice generators. But are they going to be also impacted? You need to identify that and appreciate it. And co-locations. Here's the dirty little secret. I was working at a customer site a couple weeks ago. They had an outage, and they found out that they weren't that high on the list. That other companies larger than them, it was in the fine print, that spelled out that those customers would be serviced first, and they would have to wait. Didn't appreciate that that would occur, and they had a very long outage because of it. So making sure that if you have a co-location facility, are they going to be able to give you the resources? Are they going to be able to help you? And will they expand? If multiple companies are down, will they be able to service you before someone else? All those, they can really impact your disaster recovery. So just because I like to go over it, it's about the communication again. Because the communication is key to making a good plan. You need everyone on board. The more people that are helping out, the less work any one individual has to do. And this is a very daunting project. And also clear up a lot of operational issues that you have in your environment and identify any gaps. So first, the communication, the telling of everyone what's going to happen, the top-down approach to setting business expectations. You need to gather the requirements. You need to understand what the business needs for an outage. And also, you go on to negotiate. So they may want the 0-0, but you're going to negotiate with them where is it appropriate for them. Going through the business impact analysis, those justifications. Then you're going to hit your plan stage. You're going to go design everything, often purchase everything. You're going to have the DR ready. You got the plan. You got the technology. You're going to test. And after you test, you're going to go back to communicate. Then you're going to go back to gather requirements. You're going to negotiate again, plan again, purchase again. It will be a continuing cycle. Typically, we talk about life cycles technology-wise where you develop it, you deploy it, you sustain it, you end-of-life it. A DR plan, unless your shareholders don't want your company to continue, you'll always have a DR plan. It's the one cycle that will be perpetuary.
Well, thank you, Richard. Join us next month when Glasshouse will be discussing building an infrastructure as a service cloud.